The realtor was smiling at me like she already knew something I didn't when Cassie squeezed my arm and said, "My boyfriend and I love it. We'll take it." I stood there in the sunlit kitchen holding a granite sample I hadn't asked for, and my throat closed around a laugh that wanted very badly to come out sounding normal. Cassie had moved into my spare room 11 days ago. Cassie did not have a boyfriend. And the man she was pointing at across the open-plan living room, with the confident little tilt of her chin she used when she was about to lie about something small, was me. I have replayed that 15 seconds more times than I want to admit. The realtor, whose name was Diane, and whose lipstick was the exact shade of a warning sign, turned that smile from Cassie to me and said, "Oh, congratulations, you two. What a lovely first home." And I said the thing I still cannot explain. I said, "Thank you." I said it the way you thank someone who hands you a menu. Automatic, polite. My mother's voice coming out of my mouth 32 years after she trained it into me. Cassie's hand slid down my arm and laced through my fingers, and her palm was completely dry, and mine was not. My name is Nura. I am a 34-year-old freelance medical illustrator, and until 11 days before that open house, I had lived alone in the same one-bedroom in a quiet part of the city for 6 years. I liked living alone the way some people like a religion. I had a small kitchen where nothing was ever out of place, a drafting table by the window where the afternoon light landed on my hands, while I drew hearts and lungs and the pale forked rivers of arteries, and a savings account I had built by never once in 6 years splitting the rent with anyone. The room Cassie was renting from me had been an office. I had converted it into a bedroom in a single desperate weekend 6 months earlier, when a slower work quarter and a rent hike arrived in the same envelope. I had told myself it was temporary. I had told myself I would pick the roommate carefully. I had told myself a lot of things. Cassie had answered my listing with a message so warm and specific I had cried a little reading it. She said she worked as a doula, that she was quiet, that she had 2 elderly cats she had recently rehomed to her sister because of allergies, that she cooked but always cleaned up the same night, that she believed a home was a nervous system and that 2 nervous systems in one home had to learn each other slowly. She used the phrase "learn each other slowly," and I underlined it on my phone with my thumbnail. She had come to view the apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, and she had stood in the middle of my living room with her hands folded in front of her like a person visiting a chapel. And she had said, so softly I almost missed it, "Your home is very loved." I had rented to her that evening. The 11 days between her moving in and the open house had been, I want to be honest, some of the strangest days of my adult life. They had also been, I want to be even more honest, some of the nicest. Cassie made coffee for 2 every morning without asking whether I wanted any, and every morning I drank it, because it was already poured. Because saying no would have felt like refusing a small gift. Because the mug she used for me was the good ceramic one my grandmother had left me, and I had not realized until Cassie started using it that I had been letting it sit in the back of the cabinet for years like something too precious to touch. She learned my schedule inside 3 days. She learned that I worked with headphones on until 1, that I ate a real lunch only if someone put it in front of me, that I stopped answering questions coherently after 9 at night. By day 5, she was sliding a small plate of sliced apple and cheese onto the corner of my drafting table at exactly 12:45, without a word, without breaking my focus, and lifting the empty plate an hour later the same way. I had not asked her to do this. I had not thanked her the first time because I had not wanted to make it a thing. By the 3rd time, it was a thing whether I named it or not. On day 7, she came home from a long shift, smelling faintly of hospital and something floral, and she sat down on the floor of my living room with her back against the couch, and she cried, quietly for about 4 minutes. I sat on the couch behind her, not touching her, because I did not know if she wanted to be touched, and I watched the back of her head, and I felt something I did not have a good name for. When she was done, she wiped her face with the flat of her hand, and she said, without turning around, the baby was fine. The mother was fine. Everyone lived. I don't know why I'm crying, and I said, because it was what came out. Sometimes you cry after. Because during, you weren't allowed to. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, how did you know that? And I said, my mother was a nurse. And she said, ah, just that. Ah, like she had understood something about me she had been trying to figure out since the first day. I told you all of that so you would understand what I did not understand until much later, which is that by the morning of the open house, I was already inside something. Not a romance. I want to be very careful about that word. I had not touched Cassie. I had not thought about touching Cassie in the way that word implies. What I had done was let a stranger become, in 11 days, the person who knew where I kept the good mug and why I stopped answering after 9. That is not the same thing as love. But it is also not nothing. It is the soil in which a lie can grow very quickly if someone plants one. The open house came about like this. On the Saturday morning, Cassie appeared in my kitchen already dressed, in a soft green cardigan I had never seen before, and she said, there's an open house at 10:30 on Linden Street. Would you come with me? I hate walking into these things alone. I said, you're looking at places already. I said it too fast. She said, just looking. My lease with you is month to month. I like to know what's out there. And she smiled the way a person smiles when they are telling you a version of the truth that is technically not a lie. I said yes because I had said yes to everything for 11 days. And because I did not want to sit in the empty apartment thinking about the fact that she was looking at places, and because some part of me, some part I was not being honest with, wanted to see what kind of home she was imagining for herself when she was imagining leaving mine. The house on Linden Street was on a block I had walked past 100 times in my 20s and never once been inside of. It had a small blue door and a bay window with a plant in it that was almost certainly plastic, and a Realtor sign staked into a lawn the size of a large bath mat. Diane opened the door before we could knock. She looked at the two of us on her porch, and I watched her make a decision about us in half a second, and I watched her be wrong about it, and I did not correct her. Cassie did not correct her either. Cassie stepped inside first, and Cassie said, Diane, hi. We spoke on the phone. And Diane said, come in, so glad you brought your partner. And I put my foot over the threshold of that house, and I did not say a word. Cassie walked through the house the way you walk through a memory. She touched the banister with the flat of her palm at the base of the stairs. She stood in the doorway of the small back bedroom, and she said, very quietly, this one gets the morning light. She opened the fridge for no reason and closed it again. In the kitchen, she picked up a piece of granite from the counter, a sample the previous owners must have left behind, and she turned it over and over in her hands like a stone from a beach, and she said to Diane, without looking at me, my boyfriend and I love it. We'll take it. And Diane turned that lipstick smile onto me and said, oh, congratulations, you two. What a lovely first home. And I said, thank you. I want to tell you what happened in my chest when I said it, because I think it matters. It was not shock. Shock would have been honest. Shock would have made me correct her. It was recognition. It was the specific sick jolt of a person who realizes in the middle of a sentence that they have been rehearsing this sentence for 11 days without knowing it. That every cup of coffee poured without asking, every plate of apple and cheese, every quiet 4 minutes of crying against my couch had been Cassie building a shape in my apartment. And the shape had my name on it, and I had let her build it, and now she was showing the shape to a stranger and asking the stranger to confirm it was real. And the stranger was confirming. And I was thanking the stranger. Because on some level below language, I had already agreed to be the shape she was building. Diane went to get paperwork from her car. The front door clicked shut behind her. Cassie and I were alone in the kitchen of a house that did not belong to either of us, and the granite sample was still in her hand. And the morning light was doing that thing through the bay window that Cassie had said the back bedroom would get, but it was doing it here, on her cheek, and she was not looking at me. I said, "Cassie," she said, "I know." I said, "You don't have a boyfriend." She said, "I know." I said, "You told her you did." She said, "I told her we did." And she looked at me then, and her eyes were completely calm, and completely clear, and completely awake, and I understood that she had not misspoken. I understood that this was the sentence she had come to that house to say. I understood that the open house was not for her. The open house was for me. She had brought me to a place with a blue door and a bay window and a back bedroom that got the morning light, and she had said the sentence out loud in front of a witness, so that I would have to hear it said out loud in front of a witness, because she had been trying to say it inside my apartment for 11 days, and I had not been able to hear it there. I set my keys down on the counter. I did not know I had been holding my keys. I said, "I need you to tell me what this is." She said, "I need you to tell me first." We stood there. I could hear Diane's heels on the walkway coming back. I could hear a dog barking 2 houses down. I could hear the refrigerator hum of a house nobody lived in yet. And I thought about the fact that I had lived alone for 6 years. And I thought about the fact that 11 days ago, I had rented a room to a doula with 2 rehomed cats and a phrase about nervous systems. And I thought about my grandmother's mug. And I thought about the way Cassie had said, "How did you know that?" And I thought, I do not know this woman. I do not know this woman at all. And then I thought, that is not true. I know that she gets up at 6 even on her days off. I know that she puts honey in her coffee, but sugar in mine. I know that when she is tired, she braces her hand against the door frame before she walks through it, the way a much older person would. I know that she cried for 4 minutes against my couch about a mother and a baby who both lived, and I knew, in the moment she was crying, what she needed me not to say. I know a great deal about this woman. I have known her for 11 days. Diane opened the front door. Diane said something bright about paperwork. I said, "Diane, would you give us 10 minutes? Diane, who I want to give real credit to, looked at my face and then at Cassie's face and then at the granite sample and then back at my face, and she said, "Take 20. I'll be in the car." And she closed the door again, softly, the way you close a door on a hospital room. Cassie set the granite down on the counter. She said, "I lied to you about the cats." I said, "What?" She said, "I don't have a sister. I never had cats." I wrote that in the message because it sounded like the kind of person you'd rent to. I read your listing 4 times before I answered it. You used the word quiet twice, and the word clean once, and you didn't use the word friendly at all. And I knew you were a person who wanted a roommate the way people want a good tenant. And I made myself into a good tenant. And I moved in, and I planned to stay 6 months and save money and leave. And then on the 3rd morning, I made you coffee in the wrong mug, and you drank it. And I have been trying to leave you ever since, and I cannot do it. I said the mug wasn't wrong. She said, "I know it wasn't. That's what I mean. I said, "Why are we in this house?" She said, "Because I have been living in your house for 11 days pretending I was going to leave, and I could feel you letting me pretend, and I could feel you drinking the coffee anyway. And I thought, if I could get you to stand in a different house next to me and hear a stranger call us a thing, you would either say no out loud, in front of a witness, and I could go, or you wouldn't, and I could stop pretending I was going to." I said, "You brought me here to make me choose." She said, "I brought me here to make me choose. You were the witness." I want to be careful about what I say next, because I have thought about it every day since, and every day I think about it a little differently. I did not say I loved her. I did not. In that kitchen, in that light. What I said was, "I don't know what this is." And Cassie said, "Neither do I." And I said, "I've lived alone for 6 years." And Cassie said, "I know, I can tell, it's in the way you set down a cup." And I said, "That's a very strange thing to say." And Cassie said, "You said a strange thing to me on day 7 and I didn't flinch. It's your turn." And I laughed. I laughed the laugh that had been stuck in my throat since Diane said congratulations, and it came out shaky and wet and real, and Cassie laughed too. And then neither of us was laughing, and the refrigerator hummed, and the granite sat on the counter between us like a small gray heart. I said, "I'm not buying a house with you today." She said, "I know. I don't want you to. I want you to come home with me." I said, "You live with me." She said, "I know. I mean I want to go home. With you, as the thing we actually are, not the thing I have been pretending to be so I could stay." I said, "What are we?" She said, "I don't know yet. But I don't want to find out in Diane's kitchen." We walked out of that house together. Diane was in her car with the window rolled down, and she watched us come down the little walkway, and she did not look surprised. Which is the part I keep coming back to. Because Diane had known something I hadn't known, and Cassie had known something I hadn't known, and I was the last person in that transaction to figure out what I had walked into. Diane rolled her window down another inch and she said, "Not this one, honey?" And Cassie said, "Not this one." And Diane nodded, and she said, "Only to me, you take your time." And I still do not know exactly what she meant, but I have thought about it 100 times, and I think she meant, "You don't owe anyone a yes just because they said congratulations." We did not talk on the walk back to my apartment. We held hands the entire way, and I do not remember which of us reached first, and I have decided to stop trying to remember, because I think that is the honest answer. We got back to my apartment, and Cassie went into her room and closed the door, and I heard her cry, quietly, for what I timed at almost exactly 4 minutes, and I sat on the couch on the other side of the wall, and I did not go in, because I did not know yet if she wanted to be touched, and I was not going to guess about that anymore. That was a year ago. Cassie still lives in what used to be the office. We did not rush. We are, as of the day I am telling you this, something we do not have a public word for, and I have come to like not having a word for it. She still makes coffee for 2 in the morning. I still eat the apple and cheese at 12:45. We have not bought a house. We have talked about it. When we talk about it, we do not talk about granite. We talk about which one of us would water the plant in the bay window and whether it would be a real plant or a plastic one. And Cassie always says real, and I always say we'll see, and she always laughs. Because she knows by now that we'll see is the closest I come to yes on the first ask. I want to tell you the part I have not told anyone, because I think it is the actual point. The night after the open house, after Cassie had cried and I had not gone in, she came out of her room at almost midnight in the t-shirt she sleeps in, And she stood in the doorway of the living room and she said, I need to tell you the other thing I lied about. And my stomach dropped because I had spent the whole afternoon deciding I could live with the cats and the sister, and I did not know if I could live with more. She said, I did not answer your listing first. I answered it fourth. I answered 3 others first, and I got 2 of them. I turned them down. I turned down a room that was $200 cheaper than yours, in a better neighborhood, with a woman who seemed lovely. I turned it down because your listing said the afternoon light on the drafting table is the whole reason I took this apartment. And I read that sentence and I thought, that is a person who notices light. I want to live with a person who notices light. And I did not tell you that, because I knew if I told you that on day 1 you would have been kind about it and you would not have rented to me. So I made up cats. I am sorry about the cats. I am not sorry about the light. I sat on the couch and I looked at her in the doorway and I thought about the sentence in my listing, which I had written on a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon in a small burst of honesty I had almost deleted before posting. I thought about the fact that a stranger had read that sentence and had chosen me because of it, and had lied about cats to get in the door, and had made me coffee in my grandmother's mug on the 3rd morning, and had cried for 4 minutes on day 7, and had taken me to an open house on day 11 to force a conversation she could not force in my kitchen. And I thought, this is either the most manipulated I have ever been in my life, or this is the most seen I have ever been in my life, and I am not sure they are different things, and I am not sure it matters. Because the woman in the doorway of my living room in the t-shirt she sleeps in is crying again, quietly. And this time I know what she needs me to say. I said, come sit down. She came and sat down. I did not touch her. I said, tell me one true thing about yourself that you have not told me yet. Small, any size, just true. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, I don't like honey in my coffee. I put it in because I saw you had a jar, and I thought it would give us something to have in common in the mornings. I laughed. I could not help it. I laughed until my chest hurt, and Cassie laughed too, and then I said, okay, that's the deal then. From now on, every lie you told me to get in the door, you tell me the true version, one at a time, in your own time, and I will not be angry and I will not leave. But I need the true versions. All of them. Eventually, and she nodded, and she said, okay, and she said, one at a time. And she said, thank you for not asking for all of them tonight. And I said, I've lived alone for 6 years. I don't know how to do this fast. And she said, good, neither do I. 3 weeks after the open house, on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:11, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize, with a Portland area code, and I answered it only because I was expecting a call back from a hospital about an anatomical diagram they wanted revised. The voice on the other end was a woman, older than me, tired in the specific way people are tired when they have already had this conversation several times that week. She said, is this Nura? I said, yes. She said, my name is Margaret Ely. I'm calling about my daughter. I said, I think you have the wrong number. She said, you're renting a room to her. And the floor of my studio went a little sideways. I want to tell you what the next 40 seconds felt like, because I have thought about them since. Cassie was in the shower. I could hear the water. Margaret Ely, whose name Cassie had never once said in front of me, whose existence Cassie had explicitly denied on move-in day when I asked casually about family, said, I found your listing in her old email. I've been calling every landlord she's had for 4 years. I am not calling to make trouble for you. I am calling because she is not well, and I need someone who is near her to know that. I said, "Not well how?" Margaret said, "That is not a thing I get to tell you over the phone about my adult daughter. That is a thing she gets to tell you. But I need you to know that when she disappears, and she does disappear, it is not because she does not love the people she is disappearing from. It is the opposite. And I need someone in that apartment to know that before it happens. Because every landlord I have called before, you found out after." The water in the bathroom shut off. Margaret said, "I am going to hang up now. I am not going to call again. I am sorry I called at all. Please do not tell her it was me." And she hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone. I could hear Cassie humming in the bathroom, the little tuneless hum she did when she was happy. The hum I had come to listen for the way you listen for a specific bird. And I understood, standing there, that I now knew something about her that she had not chosen to tell me, and that I had promised her on the night of the open house that I would let her tell me the true versions in her own time. And I understood that Margaret Ellie, whoever she was, had just handed me a version I had not asked for and could not unknow, and that the honest thing and the kind thing were, for the first time since Cassie had moved in, not the same thing. I did not tell her that night. I want to be clear about that, because I have decided to be clear about the parts I am not proud of. I made dinner. I asked about her day. I watched her braid her hair for bed at the kitchen table the way she always did, one section over the other with her eyes half closed, and I said nothing. I told myself I was giving her time. I was not giving her time. I was giving myself time, because I did not know what to do with the knowledge, and I was afraid that if I said the name Margaret Ely out loud, she would pack a bag and be gone by morning, and I was not ready for the apartment to be empty of her, and I hated that I was not ready. Because it meant Margaret had been right about the shape of the thing, and it meant I had a stake in Cassie staying that had nothing to do with what was good for Cassie. 4 days later, on the Saturday, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment addressed to Cassie in a handwriting I did not know, with a Portland return address and no name. Cassie was at a birth. I put the envelope on the small table by the door where I put her mail, and I made coffee, and I sat down across the room from the envelope and I looked at it for a very long time. I did not open it. I want you to know I did not open it. But I sat there and I understood that Margaret was not going to let this go, that the phone call had been the soft version, that this envelope was the second knock, and that a third knock was coming whether I wanted it to or not. And I understood that whatever was in that envelope was, in some real sense, a deadline. Cassie would open it. Cassie would read it. And then Cassie and I would have the conversation Margaret had told me was coming, and I would either have already told her about the phone call, or I would have to admit in that moment that I had known for 4 days and had said nothing. I called my sister. My sister is a family therapist in another city, and she is the only person in my life who is qualified to tell me I am being a coward without being cruel about it. I told her the whole thing. The listing, the cats, the open house, Diane, the mug, Margaret, the envelope on my table. My sister was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Nora, you are describing a woman who has been trying to tell you something true since day 3, and a mother who has been trying to tell you something true since Tuesday. And you are sitting in a room with both of their truths and refusing to move because you are afraid of what happens when you do." I said, "That's not fair." She said, "It is completely fair. You asked me." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You tell her tonight, before she opens the envelope. Not because Margaret deserves it, because Cassie does. Because you promised her in that kitchen that you would not do to her what she had done to you, which was let a lie sit in the room between you for 11 days. It has been 4. You still have time to be the person she thinks you are. On Sunday morning, you will not. I want to tell you about that night, because it is the night that made the difference. Cassie came home at 7:40 from the birth. Everyone had lived again. She was tired in a way I recognized now, the tired that had crying in it. She saw my face before she saw the envelope. She said, "What?" And I said, "Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you before you open your mail. And I need you to let me finish before you decide anything." She sat down at the kitchen table. She folded her hands in her lap the way she had folded them in my living room the first time she saw the apartment, and I remembered, with a kind of pain, that this was the posture she took when she was preparing to be told to leave. She said, quietly, "Okay." I told her about the phone call. I told her the day, the time, that I had been expecting the hospital and had picked up because of that. I told her Margaret's name, and I watched her face when I said it, and I watched something old and tired go across her eyes. Not surprise, recognition. I told her what Margaret had said, as close to word for word as I could manage. I told her that Margaret had asked me not to tell her, and that I had, for 4 days, honored that request, and that I was not honoring it anymore because my sister had told me I was being a coward, and my sister had been right. I told her the envelope had come on Saturday morning, and I had not opened it, and it was still on the table by the door. I did not tell her I loved her. That was not the shape of that night. What I told her was, I promised you in that kitchen that I would let you tell me the true versions in your own time. I broke that promise for 4 days. I am telling you now because I would rather you be angry at me tonight than trust me falsely tomorrow. Cassie did not cry. That was the part I was not prepared for. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded, and she looked at me for what felt like a full minute, and then she got up. And she walked to the table by the door, and she picked up the envelope, and she brought it back to the table, and she opened it in front of me. Inside was a hospital discharge summary from 3 years ago, and a photograph of Cassie at what looked like 17 holding a much younger child on her hip, and a short handwritten note from Margaret that said only, "I am not asking you to come home. I am asking you to answer the phone once before the anniversary. Your sister is asking too. Please." Cassie read the note twice. She folded it back into the envelope. She said, without looking up, "The child in the photograph is my brother. He died 4 years ago next month. I have not spoken to my mother since the funeral because I said something at the funeral I have never taken back. Every year around the anniversary, I disappear from wherever I am living because I cannot be in a place where someone knows me while I am the person I become in that month. I was going to disappear from you on the 23rd. I had already picked the day. The clock on my microwave said 8:19. The 23rd was 9 days away. I said, "Don't disappear on me." She said, "I don't know how to not do it. I have done it every year for 4 years." I said, "Then do it here. Disappear inside the apartment. Don't leave the building. Don't answer the door. Don't answer the phone. I will not ask you to talk. I will not ask you to eat with me. I will put food outside your door at 12:45, the way you have put it on my drafting table for a year, and I will not knock, and I will not come in unless you call for me. Do it here. That is all I am asking. Do the thing you do, but do it in a room in a building where someone knows the door is closed on purpose." She said, "You don't know what you are offering." I said, "I know I am offering it anyway." She said, "What if I am not the person you think I am, on the other side of that month?" I said, Then I will meet the person you are on the other side of that month, and we will decide together what to do about her. But you do not get to decide that alone in a hotel in a city where nobody knows your name. Not this year. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She just held her face for a long time. And then she said, from behind her hands, okay, this year. Here once, if it is bad, if I am bad, you have to promise you will tell me on the other side. And you have to promise you will let me leave if I need to leave. But this year here, okay. I said, okay. She said, call my mother tomorrow. Not me. You, tell her I am not ready. Tell her I got the envelope. Tell her I am safe. Tell her I am with someone who knows the door is closed on purpose. Do not tell her my address. Do not tell her your name. Tell her the anniversary, and I will be in the same building this year, and that is all I can give her, and it is more than I gave her last year, and she has to take it. I called Margaret the next morning at 10. I said the sentences Cassie had given me almost exactly. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, thank you. Then she said, you are the first landlord I have called who did not hang up on me. Then she said, take care of my daughter. She is not easy. She is worth it. And she hung up, and I sat in my kitchen holding my phone, and I understood that Margaret and I had, in 2 phone calls totaling under 6 minutes, become something to each other that did not have a word yet, either. The 23rd came. Cassie closed her door on the 22nd at 10 at night, and she did not open it for 11 days. I put a plate outside her door at 12:45 every afternoon. Sometimes the plate was gone in an hour. Sometimes it was gone in 6. Twice it was still there in the morning, untouched, and I took it away without a word and put a fresh one down at 12:45 the next day. I heard her cry through the wall on the 4th night for much longer than 4 minutes. I did not go in. On the 7th night, I heard her laugh at something, once a small startled laugh, and I sat on my couch and I cried a little, quietly, because I had not realized until that laugh how badly I had been listening for a sign that she was still in there. On the 11th morning, she opened her door. She was thinner. Her hair was unwashed. She stood in the doorway of the living room in the t-shirt she sleeps in, and she said, is there coffee? And I said, yes, and she said, in the good mug, please. And I made her coffee in my grandmother's mug, and she drank it standing up in the kitchen, and she said, thank you for not knocking. And I said, thank you for opening the door. And that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. That is the story of the day my new roommate took me to an open house and told the realtor her boyfriend, and she loved it. I know it does not end the way these stories are supposed to end. Nobody screamed. Nobody got thrown out. I did not discover she was married to someone else, or scamming me for the deposit, or wanted for a crime in another state. She was, and is, a doula who lies a little bit about small things when she is afraid, and who cries for exactly 4 minutes at a time, and who chose me out of a rental listing because I mentioned the light. That is all it was. That is all it is. But I think about Diane sometimes. I think about her lipstick and her smile, and the way she said you take your time out of her car window on that quiet street. I think she knew something I am still learning, which is that sometimes the person who walks you to the door of a house you were never going to buy is the person you were supposed to walk home with. And the house is just the room where you finally hear yourself say yes to something you had already been saying yes to for 11 days without noticing. So I want to ask you 2 things, and I want you to think about them. And if either of them puts a specific person in your mind, I want you to tell me about that person in the comments. Because I read every one, and lately I have started to notice that the ones that stay with me are the ones where somebody finally says out loud a thing they have been carrying quietly for a long time. Have you ever realized, standing in a room you did not belong in, that the person beside you had been quietly rearranging your whole life for weeks, and you had been letting them because some part of you had already decided you wanted them to? And the harder one, the one I really want you to sit with. Who is the person in your life right now who has been trying, in small ways you keep almost noticing, to tell you what they actually are to you, and what would it cost you to finally let them say it out loud? If this story reached you tonight, tell me about them. And subscribe, because there is a follow-up to this one, and it is about the second lie Cassie told me, which was much larger than the cat's.